There is a nurse in Columbus, Ohio, who has quietly lost over $20,000, and she has never made a single bad investment in her entire life. She has never bought a meme stock, never touched crypto, never gambled a dime, and never once fallen for a scam. In fact, the only thing she has ever done with her money is the one thing every American is taught to do from childhood. She saved it. Her name is Rachel. She is 38 years old, and by every definition her friends and family use, she is the responsible one. While her coworkers financed jet skis and upgraded trucks they could not afford, Rachel packed lunches, skipped vacations, and moved money into savings every single payday. Therefore, after 15 years of discipline, she is sitting on something most Americans only dream about: a savings account holding $90,000. But here is the twist that Rachel has never seen coming, and the reason this story matters to almost every household in America. That savings account, the thing she is proudest of, the thing that helps her sleep at night, is the single most expensive thing she owns. Not her car, not her mortgage, not even her student loans from nursing school. Her safety is what is bleeding her dry, and it is happening so slowly and so silently that her bank statement will never once show it. This is the hidden danger of keeping too much cash, the trap that punishes the most careful people in the country. And by the end of this story, one simple rule will show exactly how much cash is actually enough. The invisible leak. To understand what is happening to Rachel, picture her $90,000 as a giant block of ice sitting in the middle of a warm room. Every morning she walks past it, sees a giant block of ice, and feels safe, because from the outside it looks completely untouched. But the room is warm, therefore the ice is melting, drop by drop, hour by hour, whether she watches it or not. That warm room has a name, and every American has been feeling it at the gas pump and the grocery store for years now. Inflation. As of this summer, inflation in the United States is running at roughly 4% a year, which means every dollar buys about 4% less than it did 12 months ago. Meanwhile, the average savings account at a big traditional bank pays a rate so small it is almost a rounding error, roughly 0.4%. Now do the math that the bank is hoping nobody ever does. 4% loss to inflation, minus not even 0.5% earned in interest, leaves Rachel going backwards by more than 3% every single year. 3% of $90,000 is around $3,000 gone every year, without a withdrawal, without a fee, without a trace. That is $250 a month, quietly evaporating, which is more than most families in Ohio pay for their electricity and internet combined. But here is the part that makes this trap so uniquely cruel. If Rachel's car got broken into and $3,000 was stolen from the glove box, she would call the police, file a report, and lose sleep for a month. Yet the exact same amount vanishes from her purchasing power every year, and she feels absolutely nothing, because the number on the screen never goes down. The number stays at 90,000, therefore her brain says she is safe. But the truth is that 90,000 buys less every single year it sits there. 10 years ago, $90,000 could buy a starter home in parts of the Midwest. Today it barely covers a down payment, and in 10 more years, it may struggle to buy a decent new truck. Same number, shrinking power. That is the leak. Why smart people fall for it. Now, the obvious question is how someone as careful as Rachel could miss something this big. And the answer is not stupidity. The answer is memory. Rachel was 20 years old in 2008, watching her parents at the kitchen table staring at a retirement statement that had lost nearly half its value in the market crash. Her father worked 3 extra years because of that crash. Therefore, Rachel learned a lesson that burned itself permanently into her nervous system. The market takes, cash stays. She is far from alone, because that same scar tissue runs through millions of American households that lived through 2008, then the 2020 panic, then years of wild headlines. Surveys consistently show that a huge share of Americans hold far more cash than any financial planner would ever recommend, purely because it feels safe. And the banks know it. The big banks are counting on that fear, because every dollar sitting in a near zero interest account is a dollar they can lend out at 7, 8, or 24%. Rachel's fear is literally their business model, Therefore, they have no reason to ever call her and explain what inflation is doing to her balance. But fear is not the only trap at work here, because there is a second one that is even sneakier. It is the illusion of the finish line. Somewhere along the way, saving money stopped being a tool for Rachel and became the goal itself. Watching the number grow became the reward, the scoreboard, the proof that she was doing life correctly. Therefore, the idea of moving that money anywhere, even somewhere smarter, feels like losing, even when staying put is the only guaranteed way to lose. Psychologists call this loss aversion, the well-documented finding that the pain of losing money hits the human brain roughly twice as hard as the joy of gaining it. A market dip is loud, visible, and painful, but inflation is silent, invisible, and painless. Therefore, the brain fears the wrong enemy. And that mistake, multiplied across millions of households, is costing Americans billions of dollars in melted purchasing power every single year. The real cost in numbers that hurt. Here is where the story stops being about Rachel and starts being about everyone watching. Take the 20-year view, because that is the time frame where this hidden danger goes from annoying to devastating. $90,000. Sitting in a big bank savings account for 20 years, with inflation averaging just 3%, loses close to half of its real purchasing power. Half. That is 15 years of packed lunches and skipped vacations, cut down the middle by a force Rachel never sees and no statement ever prints. But now run the tape the other way, because the comparison is where the pain really lands. The same $90,000 invested in a plain, boring, broad market index fund, earning the historical average of around 7% after inflation, grows to over $300,000 in real purchasing power. One choice ends with roughly $45,000 of real value. The other ends with over $300,000. Same starting money, same 20 years, same person, and the gap between the two outcomes is more than $250,000. That gap is the true price of feeling safe, and almost nobody in America ever calculates it, because the losing option never sends a bill. The rule: how much cash is actually enough? So now comes the question that actually matters. The one Rachel finally asked after a coworker showed her this exact math on a break room napkin. If too much cash is dangerous, how much cash is enough? And here's the good news, because the answer is not complicated, and it does not require a finance degree or a single spreadsheet. The rule has 3 buckets, and anyone can set it up in one afternoon. Bucket number 1. The emergency fund. This is 3 to 6 months of essential expenses, meaning rent or mortgage, food, utilities, insurance, and the minimum payments that keep life running. Not 3 to 6 months of income, just expenses, because in an emergency, the streaming services and the restaurant budget disappear anyway. For a household spending $5,000 a month on essentials, that means $15,000 to $30,000. And this money is sacred, untouchable, and always in cash. Someone with a rock-solid job and 2 incomes can lean toward 3 months, but a freelancer or a single earner should lean toward 6. Bucket number 2, the known expenses fund. This is any money needed for a specific purchase within the next 1 to 2 years. A wedding, a roof, a car, a tax bill, a baby on the way. Money with a deadline that close should never ride the stock market, because markets can drop 30% in a bad year. Therefore, short-term money stays in cash, period. Bucket number 3, everything else. And this is the bucket that changes lives, because every dollar beyond buckets 1 and 2 is not savings anymore. It is lazy money. It is a workforce standing idle in the parking lot while the manager brags about how many employees the company has. That money belongs somewhere it can actually fight inflation instead of being eaten by it, whether that is a retirement account, an index fund, or paying down high-interest debt that charges more than any bank will ever pay. But there is one more upgrade, and it applies even to the cash in buckets 1 and 2. The money that absolutely must stay safe. Safe does not have to mean broke. While the big traditional banks pay that insulting 0.4%, high-yield savings accounts at FDIC-insured online banks are currently paying around 4%, roughly 10 times more. Same federal insurance, same instant access, same safety, but instead of losing 3% a year to inflation, the emergency fund roughly breaks even. Moving an emergency fund from a big bank to a high-yield account takes about 15 minutes online. Therefore, refusing to do it is choosing to donate hundreds of dollars a year to a bank that does not need it. 15 minutes, hundreds of dollars a year, every year. That is the cheapest raise in America. What Rachel did. So what happened to the nurse in Columbus with the $90,000 block of ice? She sat down one Sunday with a calculator, a cup of coffee, and the 3-bucket rule, and she did the math on her own life for the very first time. Her essential expenses came out to $4,000 a month. Therefore, her emergency fund needed to be $24,000, fully covering 6 months. She was also planning to replace her aging Honda within 2 years, so she set aside another $16,000 for that, bringing her total cash need to $40,000. Both buckets went straight into a high-yield savings account paying 4%, which means her safety net now defends itself against inflation instead of feeding it. But that left $50,000 of lazy money, standing idle, melting quietly, doing absolutely nothing for her future. Therefore, for the first time in her life, Rachel put money to work, moving it steadily into a boring, diversified index fund inside her retirement account. No stock picking, no crypto, no gambling, just her money, finally, on the payroll. If that $50,000 simply earns the market's historical average over the next 25 years, it is on track to grow past $250,000 in today's purchasing power. The discipline that built her savings never changed, but the destination did. And that one Sunday afternoon may end up being worth more than a decade of her salary. The last dab. And that brings this story to the sentence worth remembering longer than any number mentioned tonight. For an entire generation of Americans, the lesson of every crash and every recession was that cash is safety. And for small amounts, that lesson is still true. But past the size of a real emergency fund, cash quietly switches sides. Below that line, cash is a shield. Above that line, cash is a slow leak wearing a shield's costume. Because the greatest financial risk facing careful, responsible, hardworking savers was never a market crash they could see coming on the news. It was the melting they could not see at all, happening right now, inside the safest looking account they own, to the most responsible people in America. People exactly like a nurse in Columbus, Ohio, who lost $20,000 without ever making a single bad investment in her life.